All right, join us this afternoon here on Public for a one-on-one interview is Jacob DeWitte. He is the co-founder and CEO at Oklo. Jake, thanks a lot for being here. It's great to have your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So Oklo provides clean energy, according to the website, for data centers, factories, industrial sites, communities, as well as defense facilities. Let's start with a little bit of an explanation, Jake, for any of our viewers who are a bit unfamiliar with what your company does. What is advanced fission technology, and help us better understand the innovation that you say you bring to the nuclear energy field?
Yeah, so we're working on next generation nuclear reactors. Basically, what that entails is systems that use different coolants, different fuel forms, different materials, sometimes different plant configurations. At the end of the day, really all nuclear reactors are is a way to turn the heat generated from the fission process into something usable. We use different coolants that afford us some significant economic benefits, but also kind of operate in a different way so that we can do some really cool things on the fuel side, the recycling side. So that all together creates a system that leverages sort of technologies that have been developed for decades and are ready to go and have been demonstrated in the past and have a lot of promise for significant sort of improvement beyond kind of what has been done historically to date with the bulk of what, the plants we have operating today are. And that opens the door for all sorts of new things, right? With respect to different opportunities for markets, different product offerings. What I mean by that is you can offer heat that's of use in a lot of industrial settings directly, as well as electric energy. And also the ability to do some really cool things on the fuel side, like I said, like the ability to recycle fuel, which is exciting for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest is it can really drop your fuel cost, drop your cost of production down, and turn what a lot of people consider a pretty significant liability in nuclear waste into actually a pretty significant asset.
So talk to me about the advantages for anyone who's skeptical, anyone who sort of may not know very much about this, the advantages of nuclear energy, Jake, as you see them when it comes to things like cost, density, and reliability.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things. So I grew up in New Mexico. I was around nuclear from the time I was a little kid, fell in love with it because it seemed like it was something out of science fiction, but it was real, right? Every time you split an atom, you're producing 50 million times the amount of energy than when you do kind of a simple combustion reaction of like a hydrocarbon. That's an insane multiple. And it sounds like it's from something in science fiction, but it's actually real, right? And so I was hooked, fell in love with it, knew I wanted to work on it because it felt like the inevitable climb of sort of humanity. Because generally, I would say humans climb density curves in most things we do. And energy is one example of that. And nuclear is kind of an extreme manifestation in a positive way of that. So what's great about it is it uses the fewest materials per megawatt hour of energy it produces across all energy sources. By that, I mean, not just fewest, kilograms of fuel, but I mean, fewest kilograms of steel, copper, concrete, so on and so forth per megawatt hour of energy generated over its life cycle of all energy sources. By the way, it even beats fusion if you ever get fusion to work. So fission is really, really inherently beneficial in that sense. When you have that low of a material footprint, that gives you the best position in terms of economics, in terms of sustainability, in terms of scalability, all things that are really, great attributes to have. So I think fission is really well positioned. On top of that, you produce energy without emissions that are climate contributing, right? You're not releasing CO2 into the air. You're not putting smoke in the air, any of that. That's fantastic. When you're so material dense, it also means your waste is way also denser. And a really cool thing in nuclear is actually plants usually only use about 5% of the fuel in a single pass. What I mean by that is when you load the reactor up with fuel, you're only using about 5% of it before you discharge it. Then that means that the remaining fuel that we think of as waste today is actually 90+% unused fuel. So technologies like ours can tap into that. In fact, there's enough energy content in the used fuel in the United States today. The nuclear waste we think of today has enough energy content that you could power the entire country for over 150 years, right? That's insane. And every year we produce enough used fuel or waste to power the country for 4 more years. So mind-boggling numbers, very exciting in that potential. On top of that, also nuclear has a fantastic safety record. I think that's something that a lot of fear and misinformation has been sort of pumped into the world in the 70s and 80s by the environmental movement that was pretty anti-human progress, pretty anti-energy, also sometimes funded by other energy sources that viewed nuclear as a competitive threat. But at the end of the day, when you look at the facts and the data, nuclear has I don't love this metric, but it captures what I'm about to say pretty well. The fewest deaths per terawatt hour of all energy sources out there, or among the lowest, right? Kind of right down there with solar. So it's a very safe source of energy, and it uses a very small amount of land, relatively speaking. So altogether, you have something that's clean, that's reliable, that's very safe, that's extremely scalable. it's a pretty great setup for kind of looking at how we energize human progress going forward. So something that, for me, I fell in love with at a young age and have kept working on because we have so much potential. And this technology is still so young in so many ways. Yes, we discovered fission in the late 1930s. We started building nuclear reactors in the 50s, but at the end of the day, we're still kind of in the very, very early innings of this.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, a name who's certainly familiar to all of our viewers, chairman and investor at your company. What does it mean to have a name like that, someone like Sam in your corner?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, Sam's been a great friend before we even started the company and mentor, and then became our first major outside investor and board chairman, and has been that since the beginning, over 11 years ago. And, it's interesting because he saw energy as one of the most important things he could work on when we were first starting the company in 2013. I think that view and conviction has only grown, obviously, with what he sees and is, what he's seen being used today at OpenAI, and obviously what he sees coming. Additionally, like Sam brings in this great, first of all, he's one of the smartest, fastest thinking people I've ever met. And he has this great perspective he brings about hard technology and what it takes to build companies around it based on his experiences firsthand and what he's seen from many other companies based on his, involvement as an investor and mentor and all those things. So it's very, very useful to have that as a sounding board and as a support mechanism when we think about, okay, where should we go? What should we do? How should we tackle some of these things? So he's been, amazing to have along the way. And it's fun to think back when we were first starting, the support he gave there and how that scaled. He's clearly passionate about energy, and that's why he spends a lot of time on energy projects.
Oklo is now a publicly traded company. That is the ticker symbol OKLO. You're on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. You went public via SPAC, Jake, earlier this year. Why was SPAC, after all the years since you started the company, why was going public via SPAC the right route as opposed to a traditional roadshow?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I think was quite a contrarian decision. If you look back when we were looking at this in late 22, when SPACs were probably near their bottom or not in the kind of in a low view of that. Our perspective was going public was an inevitable place for the business to be, given our business model. The key thing we do that's very different than what every other nuclear company on the reactor design side has really done to date, and the other public ones do, is we don't just design the power plants and try to sell them off. We design, own, and operate. We sell power through long-term power purchase agreements. That gives us great recurring revenues. It gives us the ability to project finance and scale those things. It's a very different paradigm. So we love that. That's awesome. That said, being public opens the door for a lot more scaling for us to sort of deliver into that business model. And what we love about that business model more than anything, by the way, is that customers love it. That's what gets us most excited. But being public was something we knew would be kind of a key step on that journey. The question then turned into when and with whom and how would we go to that route? We looked at traditional IPO pathways. We looked at SPAC pathways. The thing that stood out to us was the nuclear story is still somewhat new, I would say, to the market. And there's still a lot of enthusiasm about it, excitement, but a lot of newness to it. And one thing that's a downside about a traditional IPO is you really have a pretty limited roadshow window, and the amount of capital you could raise from it, especially where the markets have been. And I think when you adjust that for hard tech and for like where nuclear's been in the market space, wouldn't be as sizable as it could be if you found the right partners on sort of a SPAC process. So we started looking around and we're wanting to thread a pretty narrow window. We wanted a simple structure. We wanted something where people would agree to lock up for a long time with us. Didn't have warrants or any of those kind of overhangs that can create some negative downward pressure and dilution. And we found it. We found it with Alt-C. Ironically, that was Sam's, I don't know if I should say ironically, but it was Sam's SPAC vehicle. We hadn't really talked to him about it at all. So he connected us, stepped away, recused himself on both sides of the transaction for that. But we found a great partner that was aligned on the mission, had taken a pretty deep dive into nuclear before looking at other opportunities and deals in the space. Very well versed. And immediately we found that there was a great angle here to sort of build a good partnership on this. We saw that we could deliver a lot of capital to fully capitalize the business. And we saw that we could spend the right amount of time in the market, sort of on a longer roadshow to familiarize the story and then build that conviction amongst an institutional investor base and an investor base as a whole. And I think we showed that we did that extremely well, right? We had one of the best, if not the best SPAC outcome ever with respect to incredibly low redemptions. We fully capitalized the business well beyond what we were targeting. So now we're fully capitalized to go off and build, multiple plants and scale from there, while also now building a pretty strong familiarity basis out there about what we're doing. So, I think it was something that we found would I'd say give us the right outcome. And we were very pleased that we definitely exceeded that expectation.
So I always love asking this question to people in your position about how much or how little you follow the stock price. So we price all SPACs at $10, of course. Right now, last time I checked, you're just a hair under 9. So let's say you're down 10% since going public via SPAC, which, by the way, in the world of SPACs, after several months approaching your first earnings call, if you're only down 10%, I think most people look at that in terms of any SPAC vehicle and say, hey, that performs better than most. How closely do you follow the ins and outs of how the stock has performed since you went public via SPAC?
Yeah, I mean, look, I look at it daily. I don't obsess over it, but I mean, we're talking about a company that's built for the very, very, very long haul. I mean, at a technological level, right, we're working on a technology and an approach from fuel recycling and from the reactor side that for all the physics reasons behind it that have been proven, we can literally power the entire planet's energy needs for billions of years using known reserves of materials on this planet. So like, we're building a company for the long haul. So we really think on those terms, but of course you pay attention to that and where it's at. I think at the end of the day, like one thing that came off of our process was we had a very simple structure, but that meant that a lot of the prior private investors of us kind of unlocked and started trading right away. I think that put some downward pressure on the price early on, but that's kind of churned through now, right? Like the big shareholders, my co-founder, myself, Sam, and the Alt-C sponsor side, they're locked up. We're locked up over a staggered 3-year period, and I think at the end of the day now you see a lot of constructive dynamics to just start moving this forward. But I also think we're trading at a pretty significant discount compared to some peers in the space. There's not that many, right? There's not that many out there. But when you look at maybe the nearest analog to us, I mean, they're trading at maybe 2 to 2.5 times our market cap. And I think part of that's like something that's going to create a lot of, I think, upward constructiveness for us as we, look, we've been out for almost 3 months. As we get more sort of time there and more footing under us, you're going to see that shareholder base continue to recycle and build for the long haul here. So
I appreciate you letting me ask that. There's not much more in the world I love talking about than the movement of a stock with someone in your position specifically. So thanks for playing ball with that, because not everyone always is. Now, one of the things I find really cool, I got to ask you about these powerhouses, Aurora Powerhouses. These things are super cool looking. Talk to me more about these things, Jake. Where do you hope to build them? And on the regulatory front, I wonder, what does the conversation look like with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission as you hope to scale these things?
Yeah. So first on the powerhouse side, so we intentionally wanted to aesthetically design things that look quite different than what people are used to thinking about with a nuclear power plant. For a lot of reasons. One is we wanted to make people to, think about these things to feel a little, just have a different response when they see them. But additionally, we wanted to take advantage of more modern construction and design approaches to make them more affordable to build and scale. And so architecturally, we're able to find a sweet spot with what these things look like. We name our reactors the Aurora, and the power plant we call Powerhouse. It kind of encompasses everything in there. We're pretty excited about sort of seeing the order book develop as we've seen it start to develop. We've announced several projects. We're going, in Idaho is our first plant. We're in a pretty unique position, fully capitalized, right, to go build that plant. We're the only company that has fuel fully allocated to us that was awarded to us through a competitive process. We have a site from the Department of Energy. So all that's moving forward in sort of a staggered but somewhat parallel fashion. We've announced 2 plants in Ohio. We've been going through multiple rounds on sort of the defense procurement process, where we've been awarded twice the base in Alaska. But they go through the, protest and reaward, or protest and reaward. So that'll eventually resolve out, and we're pretty excited about hopefully how that proceeds. But then additionally, we've announced a project with Diamondback Energy in Texas, in the Permian Basin. We're going through the specific site down select right now. But that we're eager to sort of continue to progress. And then on top of that, a partnership with Equinix, as they look at sort of powering their data centers, and they were casting a pretty wide net for a pretty large offtake of about 500 megawatts across a couple sites. And then we also announced the Wyoming hyperscale partnership in Wyoming. So we've got a pretty full slate, and there's a lot more that we're anticipating coming our way, just given how the market is shaping up here and the sort of urgency of driving for power demand, not just on the data center side, which is obviously a huge one, but also just the general electrification themes that are occurring and the energy transition themes that are occurring. And then another one that's underappreciated is what's happening on the manufacturing sector, right? We're looking at sort of re-onshoring, to kind of make up a word, all of this manufacturing base into the U.S., and that needs energy. It generally needs 24/7 energy. Nuclear is really well positioned to do that. The grid's not fully, built out to support that. So if you can bring a small nuclear plant to provide that power, which is what we can do, then you find a lot of receptiveness to that. So we're seeing that kind of line up pretty favorably. So we're kind of uniquely positioned with that scale and size of an order book, and now we're moving into the stages of execution to deliver to those and grow. And then part of that, one of the big steps on that is obviously on the regulatory front. And this is one of the things that, we've been focused on since nearly the beginning. We were the first of the non-light water reactor companies. What I mean by that is these like advanced technologies that don't use water as a coolant to be engaging with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal regulator on this in a formalized fashion dating back to 2016. It takes a lot of time and work to engage with them. They are a very technocratic organization. It's not a bunch of sort of like whimsical bureaucrats there at all. But they're rigorous. The goal of this kind of interaction, these pre-application meetings, and we've had over 100 plus or minus, like a lot of these kind of interactions, is to familiarize them with the technology, to show them how you analyze it, how you model different events, how you select events that are supposed to be representative of challenges, and then how you vet that and then justify that to them so that they then can go do an independent evaluation. So they kind of do that work independently on their own. So that entails quite a bit of information exchange. We've found that, they have a long history of approving things. They're not they're not stuck in not doing anything, but pushing forward on new things, which is kind of the key opportunity we have. And also combining that with sort of, I would argue, the broader public support and political climate where nuclear is recognized as a key sort of cornerstone of energy policy going forward on a bipartisan basis. It opens the door to try to push some things in a more modernized fashion with the NRC. And we've been at the forefront of that. We found that, sometimes we've gotten pushback on things, but this is like what forward progress looks like, right? Like we're not afraid to go out there and push forward so we can get the most out of what we're trying to do and maybe fall down time to time rather than maybe very, 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 very hesitantly take one step forward trying to push the ball down the field. So we're excited about how we've seen that progress. It takes a lot of work. We're moving into what's called the pre-application readiness assessment that will then be a dress rehearsal review for our application to then train. It's an optional step, but it gives a good sort of flavor of how the full review is going to go. And then we anticipate submitting a full application to them next year. What's different about our approach is we're doing a one-stop shop on the licensing side. This is different than what everyone else has done. Other companies have done these things called design certifications or pursuing standard design approvals or things like that. Those are just part steps or half steps towards what you fully need to get, which is a commercial operating license. We're going all in on what's called a custom combined license application, which will give us a combined license, which allows you to build and operate the plant all at once. And that's a big win because that's everything, right? And so we've been gearing up for that for a long time and kind of positioning ourselves now to submit into that space. We expect the review to be fairly time efficient. The Advance Act that was just passed by both houses of Congress and signed into law by the president in the last few weeks sets a time cap on that of 25 months for the review. So we're hopeful it'll be kind of capped by that or under that review schedule, which would put us in a spot to hopefully have a license in hand by 2027 so that we can start, building and producing power accordingly. You can do some construction work in parallel, and so we'll do that accordingly. But that kind of depends on a case-by-case basis for the projects. But the really cool thing is what happens not just with that first one, but the following ones is the subsequent licenses, right? So that's every license we submit thereafter gets referenced that first one. And that really gives you some accelerated benefits.
Jake, what is the relationship between nuclear energy and artificial intelligence? And how do you see yourself situated in that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way relationship, which is good. There's a lot of cool things you can do with AI from the reactor design side and from a lot of things, right? From permitting, from all these other things. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do there. But AI needs a lot of energy, a ton of energy, a lot more, right, than what traditional sort of search and traditional usage of software and sort of from the human experiences look like. That's creating a massive amount of demand, right, for new energy on the grid. And AI models are generally going to be wanting to run this stuff 24/7 in fairly high density fashion. So you're looking at a densification of energy needs at the data center level and not very much energy on the grid to support that. So you're seeing a movement to buy up all the capacity that can be bought up that's on the grid today. And then that's also in parallel working to support building up new capacity to power these new projects and new data centers because just so many of these new projects that want to be built, there's no power to power them. So it's existential, right? Like these things won't get built without the power because, why would you build something you can't run? So we are well positioned to offer to that because of our size. Actually, one thing that people sometimes confuse is, well, we're smaller, right? We're starting at 15 megawatts and 50 megawatts, and some people talk about gigawatt scale data center needs. Yeah, at time, I think we'll get to some of those levels, and we'll probably be bringing plants in the 100 to 200 megawatt range. But to start with, they're not going to that size. And also, people don't go build off in a data center that immediately starts using that level of power. It's going to ramp up in the tens of megawatts into maybe the low hundreds of megawatts in a single building as it builds out. But they need, like, our ability to match that size as they grow, and we grow plants with them, sort of on site or near site. That makes a huge difference to be a lot more attractive for customers. Plus, these people we're talking about powering these facilities. It's not just like a virtual PPA. It's not virtue signaling of buying something out on the market and saying, look, we're going to buy power from solar panels a couple hundred miles away. This is literally power that 24/7 needs to be there for these facilities to operate. And a lot of these groups have phenomenal uptime records. So we then have the responsibility and opportunity to meet that. Well, our ability to then build at sort of an N+1 basis, right, gives you a unique advantage, and gives us a unique advantage, I should say, to powering these data center opportunities on the AI side. What that looks like is, if you talk about a data center that's maybe 200 megawatts, we wouldn't be building just 4 50 megawatt plants. We'd probably be building 5 50 megawatt plants. And you'd have that extra plant fully on hand to basically be able to replace or offset one that's taken offline for some reason or other. But that way we can meet the sort of uptime needs that our potential customers need to have. So it's a huge, I would say at the macro level, I don't know if we've seen as many constructive features between the energy transition side, this sort of re-onshoring and manufacturing, and then maybe the biggest one right now is AI in terms of driving energy demand upward. I don't know if we've seen something like that since the initial phases of industrialization, but it's a very exciting time to be in the energy provider business.
It certainly sounds like it is. My final question for you, is there a particular presidential election result that might be more favorable for Oklo and the nuclear industry as a whole? I
think, we've been very thrilled by the level of bipartisan support. The Advance Act, which was a pretty significant piece of legislation, passed the Senate. And I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly the vote count. That's like 90-2 or 90-3 or something like that. That's huge bipartisan levels of support, right? Like I don't think there are many things out there that get even close to that. Like, that's a fantastic place to be. So I think we feel that, either outcome of the presidential election, either outcome of what happens in the Senate or the House, whatever mix of those occurs, nuclear is going to be one of the few places that has a lot of bipartisan levels of support and coverage. We're eager to see that continue, and grow. It kind of is what we've seen from both, major party platforms. That said, I think the big question is going to be sort of like, what is the next gear shift upward in policy support? And I think you're going to see some competition to see who can be the most constructive, which is a great place to be between the two parties, given the benefits it has on climate and energy security, which are, generally speaking, right, two major planks in the different parties' platforms. So I feel, I guess I would say very fortunate and very excited and thankful that sort of the rational perspective has set in that nuclear plays a massive role in this, and that both parties embrace that. And now it's going to be, it'll just kind of be interesting to see how, dare I say, forward thinking and forward leaning they get on the backside of this. But it's nice because this is one of the few areas they can work together on. So.
And there aren't many areas where we could say that. So what a blessing, perhaps for you and the industry as a whole. It's one of those rare issues of bipartisan cooperation. My special thanks to our guest today. That's Jake DeWitte, co-founder, CEO at Oklo. Jake, thanks for being here.
Thank you.